Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we sift through the mountain of source material you share with us to find the absolute core of what you need to know.
And today we are tackling a giant.
A true giant.
Right.
We're doing a monumental analysis of a company whose products, well, they basically underpin the entire digital creative economy. We're talking about Adobe Inc.
Yep. Based in San Jose, California, Adobe is that multinational software company that, historically defined content creation and publication.
I mean, when we say Adobe, we're talking about tools you use every single day, sometimes without even realizing
Oh,
it.
absolutely. Photoshop, Illustrator, and of course the big one, the universally inescapable portable document format, the PDF.
The PDF, you can't escape it. But this story is so much bigger than just a list of software titles, right?
It really is. It's a decades-long narrative. It's about rapid technological innovation, massive market consolidation, and, of course, that highly controversial mandatory shift into the subscription economy.
A shift that totally redefined how creative professionals have to operate.
Our mission today is to really explore the three pivotal eras that created this powerhouse and then, analyze the current state of regulatory pressure it's under.
So where do we start?
We'll start with Adobe's foundational role in literally sparking the desktop publishing revolution. Then we'll track its strategic transformation into more of an enterprise service provider and that contentious switch to Creative Cloud.
And finally, we'll do a deep dive into the major controversies. I'm talking security failures, anti-competitive history, and the really serious legal challenges that have popped up right up to, well, this very month.
We've got a lot to get through.
We do. We've got billions of dollars in failed acquisitions, a massive FTC lawsuit, some fundamental failures in cybersecurity to wade through. This is not just about software.
Not at all. It's about control. Control over file formats, market lock-in, and the business practices of a company that, dictates terms for nearly every professional creative workflow on the planet.
The information we have, it seems to reveal this fascinating, almost contradictory pattern.
It is a contradiction, isn't it? A company built on these genuinely radical technological innovations that now, it seems, relies really heavily on financial and structural lock-in.
Lock-in, meaning it's just difficult or really expensive to leave their ecosystem.
Exactly. All to maintain its industry dominance.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the Adobe story. It begins like so many great Silicon Valley tales with a strategic departure from a massive, established company and a new idea in a small space.
That's right. A classic garage startup almost. Adobe was established in December 1982 by John Warnock and Charles Gashka.
And these guys were coming from Xerox PR, right?
Yeah.
The legendary Palo Alto Research Center.
Very same. They'd been working on key foundational concepts for graphical user interfaces, for printing. I mean, PRC was where everything was happening.
And the name, Adobe.
It's a nod to its humble start. It comes from Adobe Creek in Los Altos, California, which, ran right behind Warnock's home.
I love that. But they didn't just stumble into the software market. Their initial strategic choice was absolutely defining.
It was crucial. They actually considered a few different business ideas first.
Like what?
Well, they thought about starting a copy service business or maybe selling a complete turnkey system for office printing, hardware and software all bundled together.
Okay, so why didn't they?
They rejected those paths to focus entirely on developing specialized software. They believed, and this was key, that proprietary hardware would limit their reach.
Smart.
Very smart. And this decision led them directly to the creation of the Adobe PostScript page description language.
Now, we need to pause here because PostScript, it isn't just some tech footnote. This was the breakthrough. This enabled the entire desktop publishing revolution.
It really was.
So why was PostScript so revolutionary? I mean, for our listeners who might not remember what printing was like before the mid-'80s, what was the actual problem it solved?
Well, before PostScript, if you wanted high-quality printing from a computer, you were dealing with these proprietary printer drivers, and they were usually based on fixed bitmap fonts.
Right, so if you try to make text bigger or smaller,
it looked awful, jagged. People called them the jaggies. And every printer needed a driver that was specific to the application you were using. The results were just totally inconsistent.
So PostScript changed all that.
Completely, because it was a language built on mathematical principles, on vectors.
So instead of telling the printer, put a pixel here and here and here, you were telling it, draw a perfect circle that's defined by this equation no matter how big you make it.
Precisely. PostScript described text, vector graphics, letter forms with mathematical precision. It was device independent. You could send the exact same file to a low-res desktop laser printer or a super high-end commercial photo typesetter.
And the output would be perfect and consistent every time.
Every single time. It decoupled the design process from the output device, which for graphics professionals was absolutely revolutionary.
And the key moment that made Adobe financially viable, like right out of the gate, involved maybe the most famous figure in tech history,
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
Jobs saw the potential of PostScript immediately. He tried to buy Adobe outright for $5 million in 1982.
Wow. And they said no.
Warnock and Geschke refused. It was a huge risk, but their investors stepped in and kind of pushed for a compromise, something that would get them capital without them surrendering control of the company.
And the deal they struck was, well, financially brilliant.
Oh, it was genius. Jobs didn't buy the company, but Apple purchased shares that were equivalent to 19% of Adobe.
And crucially, that was paired with a 5-year advance license fee for PostScript.
And that advance license fee was the secret sauce. That's what did it. It ensured Adobe had immediate, massive operating capital.
So they became the first company in Silicon Valley history to be profitable in its very first year.
In their first year, they didn't need to slowly build revenue through sales. Their foundation was laid by one strategic partner, Apple.
And that partnership powered the whole desktop publishing revolution.
It did. When Apple licensed PostScript for its revolutionary LaserWriter printers in 1985, which was the first affordable laser printer for the masses, they created this perfect synergy.
And PostScript became the international standard for computer printing almost overnight.
By 1987, it was the standard. No question. This is just a perfect example of Adobe's strategy of controlling the foundation. By owning the language the printers spoke, they controlled the quality and standards of the entire creative output ecosystem.
But even as they were cementing their dominance with PostScript, they were already fighting these strategic battles over IP, specifically over fonts.
Yes, the early font wars. Adobe released its digital fonts in a proprietary format known as Type 1.
Which was a high-quality format tied directly to PostScript.
Right. But because it was proprietary, it sparked immediate competition. Apple, and then very quickly Microsoft, developed the competing TrueType standard.
It sounds familiar. A proprietary high-quality format battling a more open standard that's being pushed by the major platform owners.
It established the tension that really defines Adobe to this day. Type 1 fonts were, they were initially superior, especially in professional printing environments. But TrueType was designed to be platform agnostic, cheaper, and more open.
So Apple and Microsoft just offered the world a functional, free alternative.
Basically, yeah. They were trying to erode Adobe's control over the font market. And this tension proprietary control versus ubiquitous adoption, it just keeps reappearing with PDF, with Flash, and with the subscription model itself.
So while the PostScript revolution was raging, Adobe was also quietly building the software portfolio that we now all recognize as the Creative Suite.
Yeah, their entry into application software began with Adobe Illustrator. And what's often forgotten is that Illustrator, the vector-based drawing program for the Macintosh, it actually evolved directly from the firm's in-house font development software.
So they were building tools for themselves first.
They were eating their own dog food, exactly, building the tools they needed to refine their core technology.
And then the 1990s were just marked by explosive growth through acquisition.
Absolutely. They released Premiere, which later became Premiere Pro, in-house in 1991, but critically, they acquired Photoshop from John and Thomas Knoll.
And FrameMaker, and then they snatched up After Effects and PageMaker from a company called Aldus.
Right. The acquisition of Photoshop, which was developed by the Knoll brothers, was arguably the most important software acquisition in history. It gave Adobe the undisputed standard in raster image editing.
But that Aldus acquisition in '94, the one that brought in PageMaker and After Effects, that was strategically fascinating for reasons we'll get into later.
Oh yeah, big antitrust implications. By integrating all these key titles, Adobe was no longer just a printing language company. It was creating the essential multi-platform toolbox for design, video, and print.
And they were financially solid. By August 1986, they were already listed on the NASDAQ.
They were a powerhouse early on.
And if PostScript defined high-quality printing, the next massive launch from them defined the universal sharing of digital documents.
PDF.
The PDF.
In 1993, Adobe introduced the Portable Document Format, or PDF, and its associated software, Acrobat and Reader. This was Warnock's Camelot project. The stated goal was to solve the profound problem of document fidelity.
Okay, explain that challenge. If PostScript solved printing fidelity, what problem did PDF solve for screen fidelity?
PDF solved the consistency problem across, wildly disparate computing environments.
Right, because in the early 90s, if you created a document in one word processor with certain fonts and then you sent it to someone with a different computer,
Yes, a disaster.
yeah, a Mac user sending to a Windows user,
The formatting would just break, the fonts wouldn't map correctly, the layout would shift. It was a mess. PDF was designed to encapsulate everything, the text, the graphics, both raster and vector, and the fonts themselves, into one self-contained package.
so it always looked the same everywhere.
Always. That consistency is why we still use it for everything today. It truly became the digital equivalent of paper.
And this is where their standardization strategy was just brilliant.
It was. They kept the PDF format itself proprietary for a long time, controlling its evolution until 2008 when it was published as an ISO international standard.
But the viewer, Adobe Reader, that was always free.
Free and universally available from day one. And that was a stroke of genius that guaranteed adoption. They monetized the creation tools Acrobat while ensuring the consumption was totally friction-free. They achieved ubiquitous market penetration without sacrificing long-term control.
And that strategy format control, it wasn't an accident. We should probably reiterate that the Aldus acquisition also gave Adobe control over the TIFF image file format.
Right. Further demonstrating their mastery of securing professional digital asset standards at the core infrastructure level. They owned the building blocks.
So as we move into the 21st century, Adobe's strategy seems to pivot. It moves away from just defining single formats and more toward consolidating the entire creative workflow.
Exactly, into these seamless, high-value proprietary bundles.
Which led to the Creative Suite. The first version launched in 2003, and it grouped the core software Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign into a single integrated package.
And this was a critical shift in how they sold the software. They moved away from individual sales toward a system where you just bought the whole toolbox at once.
And that bundled approach really paved the way for their biggest acquisition yet at that time.
The Macromedia blockbuster in 2005. A $3.4 billion stock swap.
That Macromedia acquisition, that was a defining moment. It wasn't just adding to their existing print suite. It brought in all these essential web and multimedia tools that just dominated the pre-smartphone internet.
All the big ones: Flash, Dreamweaver for web design, Cold Fusion for server-side development, Captivate. They instantly achieved dominance in both print and web design pipelines.
But that web portfolio, it came with some significant baggage, didn't it?
It did. Macromedia's Cold Fusion, for instance, was known for having some pretty complex security flaws, and the source material notes that these flaws would become highly relevant during later security catastrophes.
Because that Cold Fusion source code was among the proprietary code that was stolen later on.
Exactly, which enabled bad actors to exploit vulnerabilities in government and corporate systems that were still running the software.
So this rapid consolidation of creative tools, it was paralleled by a massive strategic pivot into the enterprise market.
That's right. In 2009, Adobe spent $1.8 billion to acquire Omniture, which was a leading online marketing and web analytics company.
And this is where the transformation from a purely creative software company to a major enterprise service provider really begins. This focus on what they call customer experience management, or CXM.
Yep. Those Omniture products were integrated into what became the Adobe Marketing Cloud.
So let's clarify for the listener. What is customer experience management, and why would a company known for Photoshop suddenly want to spend billions of dollars on web analytics?
Well, CXM is essentially the holistic management of a customer's entire journey with the brand, from, initial awareness all the way to post-purchase loyalty.
Okay, so Photoshop and Illustrator create the content, the visuals, the ads, the websites.
Right. And Omniture provided the ability to measure how effective that content was, to analyze customer behavior on digital platforms, and automate personalized marketing campaigns.
So Adobe realized that controlling the creation tools was only half the battle.
The real enterprise money was in managing, deploying, and analyzing the customer experience generated by that content. They were positioning themselves as the indispensable digital infrastructure provider, not just the designer's toolkit.
Exactly. But amidst this whole pivot, they faced a spectacular, very public defeat over one of the Macromedia crown jewels,
Flash.
the famous conflict with Apple. Steve Jobs famously refused to support Flash on the iPhone, on the iPad, on any iOS product.
He published his now infamous open letter, Thoughts on Flash, which was just a scathing technical and philosophical critique.
His argument was multifaceted, wasn't it? He cited specific technical limitations.
Security vulnerabilities, reliability issues that led to crashes, and significant battery drain on mobile devices. But crucially, he argued that Flash was a proprietary, closed system in an age that was demanding open web standards like HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript.
And Adobe's response.
Well, predictably, they countered that Apple was just seeking to maintain total proprietary control over content delivery on iOS and limit competition.
But that public argument had a very definitive outcome.
It did. In November 2011, Adobe capitulated. They announced they would cease all development of Flash for mobile devices. It was the signal that Flash was essentially dead, and it shifted the industry irrevocably toward HTML5.
The irony there is just, it's thick.
Oh, it's so thick. Adobe, the pioneer of proprietary formats that became standards, like PostScript, lost the battle because another powerful platform owner, Apple, successfully argued for an open standard against Adobe's own proprietary tech.
Which brings us to the real game changer. The moment that secured Adobe's financial future, but, you could argue, fundamentally damaged its relationship with its professional user base.
The introduction and eventual mandatory imposition of Creative Cloud.
Right. The initial shift began in 2011. Before CC, creative professionals operated on a perpetual license model.
You paid a large one-time fee. I mean, the full Creative Suite could easily top $2,000, and you owned that version forever. Updates were paid for with upgrade licenses.
And Creative Cloud was introduced initially as an alternative.
An alternative, yeah. It offered access to the entire suite for a subscription plan that started around $600 a year.
Which, for a major agency needing multiple licenses, could seem pretty enticing compared to spending tens of thousands of dollars up front.
For some, yeah. But the initial reception was mixed. While that $600 a year rate looked cheaper than a $2,000 upfront cost for one person, users quickly realized that the combination of the expensive perpetual license for CS6 and the new subscription option meant the cost burden was actually higher than ever.
And then in 2013, the hammer came down, the mandatory move.
Yep. Adobe announced that Creative Suite 6 CS6 would be the final perpetually licensed version. Moving forward, the only way to get new versions, updates, bug fixes, or new features for Photoshop, Illustrator, and the rest of the core software was through a Creative Cloud subscription.
A complete conversion to the software as a service, or SaaS, model.
Total conversion?
Oh, wait, so they took this established professional user base, the people who had built their entire careers and studios on this software for 2 decades, and overnight, they converted them from owners into tenants.
That's a great way to put it. Owners into tenants.
How did that change the psychological contract with the company?
It was perceived as a profound betrayal by many, particularly freelancers, students, and smaller studios. They felt trapped.
Because it wasn't just a voluntary new feature, it was a non-negotiable financial gatekeeper.
Exactly. The core psychological contract of ownership was just broken. It was replaced by mandated tenancy. You no longer bought a tool, you paid rent for access. And if you stopped paying, your entire professional workflow just stopped working. You couldn't even open legacy files created in the newest CC formats.
I have to play devil's advocate for a second, though. From a corporate perspective, there was immense value for the user, right?
Oh, for sure.
Agencies, for instance, now had immediate universal access to every single product, even the ones they only needed once a year, like Adobe Audition. Plus, immediate updates and collaboration features. That's a huge value proposition.
That's absolutely fair. For large enterprise clients and big agencies, the move was highly beneficial. It simplified licensing, it provided predictable costs, and those collaboration features were crucial. But for the small players, the mandatory nature was the issue.
So Adobe essentially traded widespread customer loyalty for immense financial stability.
That's the long and short of it. Wall Street loved it. It transformed Adobe's revenue stream from sporadic, high-variance sales to this highly stable, predictable annual recurring revenue, ARR. And that financial certainty drives stock valuation more than almost anything else.
And what about the stated goal of reducing piracy? That was one of the rationales that Adobe sometimes used for the shift. Did it work?
Not really. The source material notes that the subscription model failed to deter piracy, at least in the short term. I mean, within 1 day of the first Creative Cloud exclusive version of Photoshop being released.
1 day?
1 day. Cracked regions were already online. The problem wasn't solved, it was just moved to a different medium.
So the mandatory subscription model had two profound strategic market impacts then. First, as you said, the financial stabilization. Second,
Second, it created instant, powerful market lock-in. Once you adopt CC and save your files in the latest format, migrating to a competitor like Affinity or CorelDRAW becomes exponentially more difficult.
right, because you risk file conversion issues or losing proprietary data.
Exactly. This lock-in, supported by financial penalties for leaving, became the core pillar of their sustained market dominance, and it moved the focus away from pure product competition.
And when a company achieves that level of market consolidation, the scrutiny inevitably turns to two areas: security and business ethics.
And Adobe has faced massive criticism on both fronts, particularly in 2013.
That year was devastating for Adobe's reputation. It started as a data breach and quickly escalated into, a national security incident.
It really did. I remember the initial reports being shocking, but the true scale just kept getting revised upward.
Yeah, initially they reported, like 2.9 million customers were
Yeah.
affected.
But later, they had to admit that the scale was gargantuan. 38 million active user accounts were compromised, and 150 million total records of Adobe customers were made available online by the hackers.
And that's not even counting the payment card information.
No. On top of that, around 40 million sets of payment card info had been compromised the year before, in 2012, which they only discovered during this broader 2013 investigation.
So let's zoom in on the security failure itself. Because the methods they used, or rather failed to use, were criticized as being just absolutely rudimentary.
The criticism was scathing. The stolen data included encrypted credit card info, usernames, and reversibly encrypted passwords. The critical failure was how they handled the passwords. Security firms, notably Sophos, were just merciless.
Why? What did they do wrong?
They used weak encryption methods, and critically, they failed to salt the passwords.
Okay, for our listeners, what does salting a password mean, and why is the failure to do it such an egregious security lapse?
Salting is a fundamental best practice. When you encrypt a password for storage, you don't just encrypt the password itself, you attach a random, unique string of characters, that's the salt, to the password before you encrypt it.
Which means that even if two users have the same exact password,
The encrypted result, the hash, will be different because of that unique salt.
so if a hacker steals the database, they can't just run a massive dictionary attack against every password simultaneously.
Exactly. Without salting, the hackers can use what are called rainbow tables or other pre-computed lists to decrypt massive batches of passwords extremely quickly. Not salting passwords, according to security experts, allowed for the recovery of a huge amount of information with very little effort. It was a profound embarrassment for Adobe.
But the long-term threat wasn't just the customer data loss, as terrible as that was.
No, it was the source code theft.
That's right. Hackers got into Adobe's internal source code repository. They stole vast portions of proprietary code for major products.
Photoshop, Acrobat, and critically, Cold Fusion. This theft was described by some security researchers as one of the worst in U.S. history in terms of corporate intellectual property compromise.
So why is source code theft so dangerous, especially years down the line?
Because the source code is the blueprint for the application. If malicious actors have that blueprint, they can scrutinize millions of lines of proprietary code to find zero-day vulnerabilities exploits that Adobe doesn't even know exist yet.
Which allows them to create these targeted, persistent attacks.
Right. As we mentioned, flaws in that stolen Cold Fusion code were later used to breach systems at PR Newswire and Washington state court systems, exposing thousands of Social Security numbers. It opens the door not just for easier piracy, but for long-term supply chain vulnerabilities for every enterprise customer running those Adobe products.
And to add insult to injury, the way they handled the crisis showed a clear disparity in how they valued their customers.
Yeah, that was bad. Adobe offered affected U.S. customers free credit monitoring services, but no similar arrangements were made for non-U.S. customers.
Despite the global nature of the breach and the clear financial risk for everyone.
It was a globally destructive failure managed with a regionally narrow solution.
So, moving beyond security, Adobe's history shows this clear, decades-long pattern of leveraging acquisitions to eliminate direct competitors.
And that has generated significant antitrust concerns. The prime exhibit here is the Freehand case.
This case is the perfect illustration of how market dominance, once you have it, can be used to stifle innovation. We have to go back to 1994 when Adobe acquired Aldus Corporation.
Right. Aldus owned PageMaker and After Effects, which Adobe wanted, but Aldus also owned a program called Freehand.
Which was a direct, viable competitor to Adobe Illustrator, their flagship vector graphics editor.
And the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, stepped in immediately. They recognized that by controlling both Illustrator and Freehand, Adobe would have a near monopoly on professional vector graphics editing.
So what did they do?
They issued a consent decree that banned Adobe from acquiring Freehand or any similar program for 10 years. Adobe was forced to divest Freehand, selling it back to a company called Altus.
But the ban had an expiration date, and the story didn't end there.
No, it didn't. Altus was acquired by Macromedia, which kept developing Freehand as a legitimate competitor. Then, in 2005, Adobe acquired Macromedia for $3.4 billion.
And in doing so, they acquired Freehand again, this time after the FTC ban had expired.
Perfectly legal, but the effect on competition was devastating.
So once they reacquired Freehand, what was the strategic move?
Elimination. Adobe stalled all Freehand development in 2007. They just stopped updates, rendering the product obsolete and incompatible with future operating systems.
So they effectively created a situation where they controlled the only two professional vector graphics products for Mac, and they deliberately made one of them useless.
Exactly. It created a decade-long vacuum in professional vector competition.
And this action was a massive provocation. It triggered 5,000 graphic designers to stand up and sue.
It did. In 2011, a group of 5,000 professional users filed a civil antitrust complaint under the banner Freehand. They alleged Adobe violated antitrust laws by abusing its dominant position to deliberately kill Freehand rather than compete on product merit.
And their argument was that abandoning a robust product line was designed purely to funnel users to Illustrator.
That was the core of it. Now, the suit was settled out of court, and Adobe didn't admit guilt, but the Freehand community's ongoing demand that Adobe release the product to open-source developers, it just shows the enduring resentment over that move.
It's a crucial historical lesson.
It is. If you control the infrastructure, and then you acquire all your competitors, the only thing left to compete on is price and service. And as we've seen, Adobe has faced consistent criticism on both of those.
Which brings us to those persistent financial and reputation-based complaints, especially around global pricing disparity.
Oh, this has been a recurring issue for decades. Retail prices for Adobe products were consistently reported to be up to twice as high in non-US countries. For instance, the price for Creative Suite 3 Master Collection was £1,000 higher for European customers than for US customers.
And a petition protesting that unfair pricing got tens of thousands of signatures.
It did, and the financial policies often felt disconnected from global economics. In June 2009, despite the British pound weakening against the dollar, Adobe increased its UK prices by 10%. And they actively prevented UK users from buying from the cheaper US online store.
So they enforced regional pricing differences even when it disadvantaged their international customers.
Right, and this perception of aggressive, inflexible pricing, combined with, notorious software bloat, especially in their free offerings, created a major reputational problem.
To the point that TechRadar included two of their cornerstone products, Adobe Reader and Flash, on its list of the 10 most hated programs of all time.
Citing their ubiquity, frequent security updates, and just general inefficiency.
And it's worth quickly noting that this pattern of control wasn't just external.
No, in 2013, Adobe was part of a class action lawsuit filed alongside tech giants like Apple, Google, and Intel, alleging the company had engaged in illegal hiring agreements designed to suppress employee compensation.
And that suit was eventually settled in 2014, with the four companies paying a substantial $324.5 million to the employees involved.
So the issues of anti-competitive practices clearly extended to their internal operations as well.
Okay, so as we enter the modern era, Adobe has fully leveraged the stability of its subscription revenue to pursue these aggressive acquisitions.
And they're focused almost entirely on bolstering their enterprise services, specifically the Experience Cloud.
The pace of these billion-dollar purchases is staggering. We saw the acquisition of the e-commerce provider Magento Commerce for $1.68 billion in 2018.
Marketing automation for Marketo for $4.75 billion, also in 2018.
Workflow startup Workfront for $1.5 billion in 2020, and the video collaboration platform Frame.io for $1.275 billion in 2021.
And these moves aren't about getting a better version of Photoshop. They are about building out the Adobe Experience Platform. This platform, built on their Sensei AI and machine learning framework, it uses those acquired tools to provide comprehensive customer experience management.
So they're saying to enterprise clients, We don't just provide the design tools. We are the operating system that runs your marketing, your data analytics, and your sales funnel, from creation all the way to conversion.
That's it exactly. They're leveraging their existing dominance in creative services to become an indispensable piece of enterprise IT infrastructure. If you're a Fortune 500 company, moving away from Adobe Experience Cloud would mean ripping out your core marketing and data infrastructure.
Which makes the lock-in far deeper than just the file formats themselves.
Much deeper.
And this expansion leads directly to the biggest corporate drama of the last 2 years, the failed mega acquisition of Figma.
Oh, this was huge. In September 2022, Adobe announced its massive, ambitious $20 billion deal to purchase Figma.
$20 billion.
Yeah.
And Figma, at the time, was the leading, rapidly growing competitor to Adobe XD, their own prototyping tool.
Figma had become the darling of the user interface and user experience design world. It was cloud native, it was collaborative, it was fast. It represented a genuine threat to Adobe's future relevance in a critical high-growth design segment.
And the moment that deal was announced, it faced intense global regulatory scrutiny.
Immediately, both the U.S. Department of Justice and the European Union's antitrust regulators expressed deep concern. Their worry was straightforward. Adobe already holds a near monopoly in the desktop design software market.
So eliminating Figma, the primary emerging challenger, would just eliminate all competition in an entirely new segment.
This is the freehand case all over again, but on a $20 billion modern scale. The strategy of if you can't beat them, buy them was finally running into serious legal resistance.
And the argument from regulators was that even though Adobe XD had failed to match Figma's growth, Adobe was just so dominant that allowing them to buy the competitor would halt all real innovation in the sector.
And the regulatory pressure was so intense that in December 2023, the two companies called off the merger.
That failure came with a hefty price tag, too.
A massive one. Adobe had to pay Figma a $1 billion termination fee.
$1 billion. It just underscores the immense risk Adobe was willing to take to ensure no single viable competitor could exist in its core creative market.
And this attempt at horizontal consolidation was thwarted, but it leads us directly to the latest legal battles, which center on the vertical integration of their subscription model itself.
So the mandatory subscription switch from 2013 has finally generated serious federal legal fallout.
It has. The outrage over the high cancellation fees has been brewing for years. Customers complained on social media about the fee, which was reported to be 50% of the remaining annual contract value if they tried to cancel early.
It was basically a financial punishment for trying to leave the ecosystem.
And this issue escalated dramatically in June of 2024 when the U.S. Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice filed a joint lawsuit against Adobe and two of its executives.
And the suit alleges clear violations of the Restore Online Shoppers Confidence Act. What are the specific allegations?
The lawsuit focuses on two things: deception and difficulty of exit. The FTC alleges Adobe failed to clearly disclose that early termination fee during the sign-up process. They used fine print, obscure hyperlinks, and complex web paths to hide the actual cost. They claim users were tricked into signing up for an annual commitment that was disguised as a simple monthly plan.
And what about the difficulty of leaving? The difficulty of exit?
The suit alleges Adobe made it absurdly hard to cancel, essentially creating a deliberately frustrating cancellation funnel.
So customers would face obstacles like being forced through multiple retention screens, being redirected through complex web portals.
Dropped calls, being transferred repeatedly between representatives who couldn't actually process the cancellation only to find out later they were still being billed. The FTC views this as illegal retention through friction.
And this is so significant because it targets the very core financial mechanism, that sticky, recurring revenue stream that has powered Adobe's stock growth for the past decade.
Absolutely. The strategy of aggressive lock-in, which relied on making departure difficult and expensive, is now directly facing a federal regulatory challenge.
And almost simultaneously, in June 2024, Adobe faced a completely different but equally furious customer backlash.
Over its terms of service regarding generative AI.
Right. This was a massive trust crisis. A TOS update for Photoshop sparked widespread fury because the language stated that Adobe may access your content through both manual and automated methods, such as for content review.
And that vague language, combined with the industry shift toward training AI on user data, immediately raised fears among professionals.
The concern was immediate and profound, especially for design agencies and freelancers working under strict NDAs with major corporate clients. The fear was that their confidential work could be viewed by Adobe staff.
Or worse, inadvertently used to train Adobe's Firefly generative AI models.
The uproar was so intense that Adobe was forced to respond the very next day.
They issued a clarification and updated the TOS to explicitly pledge that it would not use customer data to train its generative AI models. But they failed to fully address the separate clause that grants them the ability to view customer content under NDA.
So the core issue of transparency and trust remains damaged.
Very much so.
So what does this all mean? If we connect this history to the modern regulatory environment, what is the ultimate conclusion about Adobe's position?
Well, the history of Adobe is a paradox. It's a paradox of competence and control. Technological innovation, especially PostScript and PDF, created market dominance. But once that dominance was achieved, the company's focus shifted dramatically toward financial strategies.
Right, mandatory subscriptions, maximizing annual recurring revenue, and using structural lock-in via file formats and these deliberately difficult cancellation funnels, rather than just relying on having a superior product.
And the current regulatory environment, especially the FTC lawsuit and that blocked Figma deal, it indicates that this aggressive financial dominance is now being challenged as anti-competitive and deceptive business practice.
So it means that the high-stakes world of creative software is now dominated by enterprise financial strategy, where a $1 billion termination fee for a failed merger is just a cost of doing business.
And where consumer complaints about hidden fees and difficult cancellations trigger federal lawsuits. The company built on revolutionary design is now being judged on its accounting practices and its legal tactics.
Okay, let's try to recap. Adobe's historical importance is just undeniable.
Completely. They truly pioneered desktop publishing with PostScript, they revolutionized document sharing with the PDF, and they built the industry-standard creative toolkit with Photoshop and Illustrator. I mean, they created the infrastructure the rest of us rely on.
But their contemporary status is that of a powerful giant facing significant regulatory and customer backlash. That strategic shift to the Creative Cloud subscription, while financially brilliant for shareholders, has generated immense antagonism among the professionals who use their products every day.
So here are the key strategic takeaways for you, the learner, as you track the future of this company.
What's the first one?
First, never underestimate the power of controlling fundamental file formats. By establishing standards like PostScript and PDF, Adobe built an infrastructure that competitors still struggle to bypass, and that provides a critical base level of lock-in.
Second, recognize the high-stakes nature of that mandatory subscription pivot. It solidified their financial stability and secured massive recurring revenue, but it fundamentally altered the relationship between the software vendor and the professional user.
It moved from ownership to mandatory tenancy, a shift that is now being tested in federal court.
And finally,
note the ongoing scrutiny over anti-competitive behavior. From the deliberate elimination of freehand decades ago to the failed $20 billion acquisition of Figma today, regulators are actively pushing back
against Adobe's near-monopolistic control and its deceptive business practices, as we see with the current FTC lawsuit over cancellation policies.
Right. Market dominance does not mean freedom from regulation, especially when your business practices appear designed to trap users.
So let's leave you with this provocative thought to consider. Adobe secured its early first-year profitability through an essential investment from Steve Jobs, who later fought aggressively against Flash because he wanted to foster a more open web ecosystem. Given the massive failed $20 billion Figma deal due to monopoly concerns and the current FTC lawsuit over business practices that hinge on lock-in and high exit fees, well, mandatory subscriptions and aggressive pricing strategies ultimately limit Adobe's ability to innovate and attract new users in the face of faster, cheaper, modern competitors.
That's the big question. You have to consider the fundamental power dynamics inherent in the modern software as a service model. The ultimate challenge for giants like Adobe is whether their dominance will continue to breed genuine product innovation or whether it will merely breed reliance on customer retention through difficulty and expense.
Something to chew on until our next deep dive.
Indeed.
We'll see you next time.